Yesterday was Transgender Day of Remembrance, and President Joe Biden marked the day by paying tribute to many trans people who have lost their lives due to violence between this and the last Transgender Day of Remembrance. He posted this tweet saying, "There is no place for hate or discrimination in America. No one should lose their life simply for being themselves." And unfortunately and tragically, predictably, many do every single year amidst an increasing amount of focus from the right on trying to demonize, harass, and inspire violence against this community. We have earlier this week, sort of in line with the day, Human Rights Campaign putting out a report talking about the epidemic of violence against transgender individuals as well as other members of the LGBTQ community. And they have highlighted the 33 transgender and gender non-conforming people who have been killed between last Transgender Day of Remembrance and this. And in total, since just 2013, 335 transgender and gender non-conforming people. And every one of the numbers that we're going to show you is absolutely devastating. The yearly numbers are terrible. The overall numbers are just insane. But you also need to know the nature of the violence, so who it actually targets. So 62% of victims of fatal violence are Black transgender women, 85% were people of color, 83% were transgender women. So you can see sort of the way that breaks down in that particularly biased way. And then this is just devastating when you think about what each of these numbers, if we could go to graphic 5, represents. It's a chart going back to 2013. Of the deaths by year. And there's variation over time, but it also seems to my eye that it is trending up. And you would hope that in a modern society, it would be moving in the opposite direction. But we also know where culturally and politically and ideologically, the conversation that the right has been driving over the past few years in regards to transgender individuals, we know what it's like. We know the legislative actions targeting that community and other people in the LGBTQ community. Why would we be be surprised at all that there would be so much violence? A pretty significant increase just from last year. Mm-hmm. Anyway, there's some limited actions that the Democrats have been trying to take at the federal level to pass legislation to protect trans rights. Back in May of this year, there was the Equality Act. Every House Democrat was a co-sponsor of it. It would expand federal protections for LGBT people from discrimination and overturn anti-trans legislation at the state level, the dozens and dozens and dozens of bills that have been proposed and passed in a number of different states. But unfortunately, the Republicans blocked it because, of course, they did. The pro-life party does not want protections that would protect people's lives. They just don't want it because they care more about the hateful people who have made core to their existence, despising the very existence of transgender people, than they do about those transgender people. And so that's the sad place that we're at, as we celebrate or, recognize, mark Transgender Day of Remembrance. But Yaz, what do you make of this?
So we know that Trump is on trial right now for trying to prove whether or not he was involved in inciting a riot on January 6th, right? And he's saying, no, I didn't do that. I didn't say anything that made this riot happen, even though anyone can look at the things that he was saying for the years leading up to the riot on January 6th and say, you did this, You influenced large swaths of people across the country. You filled them with hatred. You filled them with fear. And you drove this reaction. But now there's a whole court case trying to prove that his words did have consequences, right? And we see this happen all the time, especially with the right, they demonize so many different groups of people. And every time they do that, we see murders of attacks on those people. We saw it with the China virus, right? We saw Asian American people all across the country being attacked in the streets, just kind of shamelessly, really, really jarring. We see it with Muslims, we see it with Jewish people, we see all different minority groups feel this. And we're seeing it now with the LGBT community. And they're going out of their way to say, we don't care about that. We see that the deaths are increasing. We're not taking any responsibility because we didn't tell anyone to kill anyone, but we're going to keep spewing all this hatred. We're going to keep othering them. We're going to keep demonizing them. We're going to keep calling them really, really horrible things and accusing them of really, really horrible things. And I wonder if part of the reason why that rhetoric is so pervasive is because I think a lot of people still don't know transgender people in their personal lives. Like even me personally,
Possible.
I only know like a handful, but I think a lot of people, they're an easy group to other because so many people live in isolated rural communities, especially Republicans. So they're really just not exposed to a lot of different types of people. That's why they feel so strongly about all these minority groups because they just don't have interaction with them.
Yeah.
And I like to think that if they did have more interaction with them, things would change. Their minds would be open to the fact that these are literal people who are dying. But we don't know that. And right now, this is what we have to deal with.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it really does like remind me of one of the core differences. This is not true of everyone, but I feel pretty comfortable in mapping this out over the political spectrum. Like our side, to greater and lesser extent, tries to have at the core of our value system the ability and willingness to extend empathy and compassion to people without needing to know them.
Yeah.
Or even know what they're like, to be familiar, but to go into it with that approach. And on the other side, there is it's like startling willingness to like enthusiastically hate and fear people without needing to know them, without having to ever interact with them, without having them have any direct impact on their lives, but to still be willing to hold hatred and fear and jealousy and suspicion and misinformation and all that. And of course, there are those who are profiting massively by inspiring that. And we're not going to change it. We can't. I can speculate about the people who they have missed one day in the last 3 years demonizing trans people on their shows, how they would feel if they saw this. But I know how they would feel. They would feel celebratory. They would like this. And maybe I'm just saying this because, I just had my first child, but I hope someday, and we can't assume that the next generation is going to be better than the one that we have right now, but I wonder how my daughter will view me, and to the extent that she understands what I did in my career, what she'll think about it, what I chose to use my platform for. And I hope for these people that at the very least, they feel cut off, they feel isolated, they feel frozen out by their children who will utterly despise them for the hatred that they spent their lives spreading, the violence that they inspired. I don't know for sure that will happen, but I hope at the very least we have that. Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.